topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the host and their guests, and not those of W4CS Radio, its employees, or affiliates. W4CS makes no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening to the Cancer Support Network on W4CS.com.
Welcome.
Yes.
Hi, Daria.
Hey, how are you, Arti? Good to kind of join the North and the South together today.
I know we're all wearing. I'm wearing my jacket. I mean, blazer jacket.
I know. I said I was amazed that down there in Virginia area, it's actually pretty cool as well. So I know it is here.
I know it's weather. Well, welcome everyone, and I just want to highlight. While the banner was coming up, Daria, do you remember when Regis and Kelly? Did you ever watch that show?
Yeah.
So when I'm taking way back. So when Regis and Kelly, before when it went from Regis and Kathy. I think because there's a transition.
Yeah.
I think after Kathy Gifford. After she retired, right? I think then. Or had left the show, there was this period, and so the banner didn't change or something, right? So I was just noticing, and everyone, our banner is going to change eventually because Daria and I are co-hosting the show now, but things take time, and I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that it reminded me of that, like these transitions we have.
Right. It's the beginning stages of the transition. And I think the joining of the forces as well. So over time, also, things will twist and turn, but at the same time, we've got the same main goal is helping individuals in times of need, honestly, in multiple different areas and in all areas of wellness, let's say, as well. So.
Yes, for sure. So how have you noticed, now that you bring up weather, you have noticed this? Today was the first day that I could tell you we really noticed the shift. And last night there was a lot of wind happening. And so we can notice that this fall, Christmas is coming in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is a shift into, this kind of hibernation season where we're kind of now bringing ourselves back inside and, still trying to get out here and there, but knowing that the colder weather is going to start bringing us indoors and trying to be conscious about, all of this pandemic aspect of things while we're bringing ourselves in, but at the same time, using this hibernation period as a period of also trying to grow and find ways to, when the season comes awry again, to be able to blossom and really show a lot of what you've done in that season. And so I think it's a great topic to actually have for today, because I think pre-planning of a lot of things in our lives are very important. Sometimes I honestly, I struggle with it, you know what I mean? In preference to pre-planning anything, what's for dinner? I don't know. I usually figure it out like mid-making, right? So like it's on the stove, it's in the pot, it's already sizzling and it's cacciatore. I don't know. So at the end of the day, I think the thing about the pre-planning of things is something that I think all of us need to pick up in our lives somewhere, somehow. And I think the areas that we're about to talk about today are hard talk areas, especially for people that are struggling with different illnesses and especially in that terminal sense. or even family members that are in this role of caring for and sometimes even taking the responsibility of doing a lot more. And so at the same time, it's just making sure that people have the information that they need to really do it, to really put things in reference to a person's life. The beginning, we do so much planning. We plan the room, we plan the this, we plan the that, and at the end of the day, we need to look at the full spectrum. And I think if we're talking about the alpha and the omega aspects of things, it's really trying to recognize that we need to plan that aspect of things too. And it's it's a hard thing to kind of bring your mind to even thinking about. So I think
Yes.
definitely it's something to start the conversation.
100%. And because there's so much emotion revolved around. I think oftentimes people are scared, right? Because then it's like, if I'm pre-planning or planning and talking about my death and my aftermath, post-death, then that means that it's inevitable. Like, so it conjures up a timeline. Don't you think that's part of what? Do you think that's part of what happens? Is that
Definitely. I think that is the biggest reason, because we don't want to think about there being an end. And
Mhm.
our society has not allowed us to embrace the end. That's what makes me as a funeral director, and my dad, and even me taking over his funeral home being something that is odd and unknown, and honestly is a conversation piece going out to dinner. Everybody, it just all of a sudden takes a turn, because it's an area of life that people know about is going to come awry, but have they embraced the reality of that and done the work in reference to getting things in order to be able to gracefully ease into that transition? Not just the transition over, but that care and everything that comes beforehand. So it's very important for us to recognize that also everybody has a time and place where they start thinking about this, or start to allow the thoughts and allow it themselves to embrace that thought. And that is one of the main points when we're talking about the movement for a moment and pause, is really recognizing that we're really talking about your legacy. You're preparing for your legacy. You know what I mean? There's pre-planning of a lot of stages before that. And I think, we usually see people in like their, retirement ages starting to bring these thoughts to the forefront. You know what I mean? Because there's changes when it comes to their estate planning, and at the end of the day, there's a lot of us that don't have maybe those jobs that leave us with these packages. And even those individuals, there's a necessity in reference to having pre-planning in place. Also, educating different areas within the community, say even the insurance companies, and letting them recognize that what happens at the end of these people's lives if that insurance policy makes it impossible for them to get health care. How do they manage that situation? So these kind of pre-conversations, you know what I mean, really help a lot of people kind of, it kind of triggers these thoughts of, well, what would happen in my situation specifically? And I think it's very important for us to recognize that everybody has a different situation, and to understand that their situation is a situation that is probably not awkward to anybody else. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, but it's in the conversation is where we find that. So
absolutely? So just acknowledging the fact that it is very anxiety provoking is probably why we shut it off. So again, back to our brains and fight, flight, freeze. So we do kind of either freeze or we flee, right, when we get into it, because the anxiety system kicks in. messes with us a little bit. We get scared, and then honestly, many of us are like, I will do it, but I have a to-do list of da, 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 right? The
Yeah,
daily task list.
for
And
sure.
so we keep putting it off and off and off.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen that too, where like even from like and the times change, each decade changes. If you have young children, that changes the dynamics when they get into adolescence. You may have a different game plan of who you want to leave your children with,
Right.
from if you have a will, right? It may
Yeah.
change.
And
Circumstances.
that's the thing. Yeah, it's really one of those things where your pre-planning, right, of your your end of life planning, right, across the board, all of that is really a schematic of like a business plan. You know what I mean? That you have to always keep changing over time. You have to keep readdressing, keep, whether it be changing with the times, changing with the environment, changing with the people that surround you, and recognizing who those people are that you would like to keep that legacy that you have built and sustain it. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, have to be honest. I'm one that looks at legacy in two realms. When we're talking about a legacy, could be simple as a smile. You know what I mean? And working on making sure that that's how people remember me, or it's this big foundation that you might be leaving as well, but it's still sustaining that. You know what I mean? And recognizing that these are the things that we're passing on to the generations that come after us, and it's thinking about others in that. So, but I think the reality of the conversation, it is hard even for myself. And I think it's only been because it's been something that I work in daily that I have been able to embrace. But at the same time, I feel it's given me somewhat of a vantage point being able to embrace it and look at life backwards. I think so. And that's why I wanted to create Pause, so that it was a place that people could start looking at life and it be okay, when they got to that point where looking at life backwards and figuring out, well, how do I walk in the light of that legacy? You know what I mean? And have that opportunity to do so. So it's something that you're basically, now creating this resume of things that, that becomes some part of your obituary at the end of the day. Like, I see beautiful lives, expressed through these obituaries. And, if you wrote it before, if you wrote it how you'd like it to be written on that day, and try to live and walk in that, I think is something that is attainable, but it's a hard one, because you are thinking about the loss of others losing you, but then also the reality of how you start thinking about the loss of others that you have lost yourself, and how that feeling, you know, um, can stress you out. You know what I mean? And bring you deep down if you don't know how to keep riding that wave, you know. But it's all easier said than done. And knowing when to get the help that you need and at what level, whether it's a simple life coach scenario and you kind of can move it with a partner, or it's a situation where you're really needing, a psychologist, a psychiatrist to help you kind of move the chemical changes that have actually happened due to this grief and this pulling down. But also, finding out that you're dealing with a terminal illness puts a depression in play. um, so when you're talking about when to do this, a lot of it is as early as possible. Like when you get married, you know what I mean? Maybe you guys put a whole thing together, you know what I mean? So when you're healthy, because you're saying to death do you part, and you talk about in sickness and in health, you're talking about all these areas, right? Well, let's put it maybe there, so that it's not something when the time arises. Now, maybe you have to go back and tweak it and twist it and whatever, but it's not something that we should not be trying to kind of get it all in play early, but it's a big shift society-wise.
Oh, I know it is a tall order, but it is necessary. And we've seen that with discussion of the pandemic and how many, and then when you look at just the idea of families in general, when they talk about someone who has things as much as they can be in order versus things that are not in order. And I really love your analogy of a business plan. Like that definitely sticks with me, even though I don't. I'm so bad with the business plan, but I do believe that you need to have like an outline, right? Number two, I think, Daria, everybody's afraid of paying taxes and afraid of Uncle Sam taking their money. Well, folks, get this. If we don't pre-plan, Uncle Sam, Aunt,
He's gonna get,
anybody,
getting
they're
it.
coming out, and they will coming, and they will sweep in and take it.
Yes.
And let me tell you something. I believe in paying into the system,
Mhm.
and I think most of us do. But at a point, for someone who has worked really their tail feathers off to create a legacy that we're talking about financial, I'm just in that financial realm for just a second, or even material, well, whatever it is, for it not to be accounted for happens all too often.
Yes.
I have been to probate, and when I talk to the folks at probate, they're like, you should see the things that I have to, like a laundry list. And
Yes.
I wanted to weep over like $300, $400. Like, you have nothing compared to other people, right?
Oh, no. Yes. And it's, I mean, you see famous people dying without these things in order. And you've seen, and heard about different scenarios and what has happened, and not knowing all the details, you know what I mean, is sometimes the issue in reference to how you look at that perspective, you know what I mean, or a situation. But at the same time, I think if the getting the things in order in advance and how that can sustain your legacy, provide for the next generation within your legacy, right? But at the same time, avoid this tax base that is going to get there, that you're going to get hit. A lot of the times what I'm seeing is that a husband and a wife, they'll purchase a house together, they'll build this whole life, and then they have some children as well. One passes, and then the other one is there, able to keep sustaining the estate, but not necessarily having to run into probate court and doing all the other things, because the spouse has, the highest basically rights at the end of the day when a person passes away. And so it's an easy transition. Whereas now the second parent passes away, and the children layer, the sibling layer, the children, are usually where the feisty lies, and the dynamic lies. And it's really the women that I'm seeing, the moms going out there recognizing, like, I think I need to get this in order. You know what I mean? Guys are kind of like, put me in a pine box, I don't get it, that kind of thing. But the moms are recognizing a little bit of what this is doing, or could do to their child, in reference to trying to really put things in order in advance. And I think that's definitely one of the purposes, is just that easing of what, number one, I always say to the families I serve, there's no want in this, right? So when I say to you, what do you want to do for the funeral services? There's no want. There's none, absolutely no want, right? So it's now a responsibility. So it's, if you were having to, right, think about it in this realm, how would you like it to look, right? And so, but all of that, if it were already in order, mom already laid everything out, dad already had the money put there to the, in a insurance policy or something like that just covered that. I think, or even starting a trust, in reference to pre-planning or pre-need contracts and things like that with a funeral home, or even some of the trust fund companies that they have out there now. But I think it's definitely behooves a lot of us to get a lot of these things in order. I mean, you're seeing even people that don't have family members passing away, and then what? The state, taking them into their care. So whether it's your physical you, or it's all the assets that you got that, what I mean, you've attained and you're trying to sustain, we're trying to make sure you're getting the proper information that you need to be able to do so. And I think a lot of where you start at to do so is a lot of times just going and starting to look for this funeral home. Sometimes funeral homes are like the funeral home that's in the family. The family's been using it for years. You know what I mean? And so at the end of the day, it's like Tide. Like my mom used Tide. I'm going to use Tide. You know what I mean? It's just been always like a word of mouth thing. That's why you don't see a lot of us on advertisements and things like that. We're just kind of getting there because the sensitivity in advertising in itself, marketing in itself is a little hard, and in just thinking about in that realm anyway, right? And I feel like a lot of it at the end of the day, there's inevitability, and it's just hopefully they choose you, is what I would think the perspective should be. So choosing that funeral home, once you choose that funeral home, you're comfortable with it. It's getting those numbers in play. And sometimes shopping around is what people need to do. Shop around to different places that are in your community, or you've even word of mouth, right, heard of, or maybe that person is actually serving, in your community somewhere, somehow, you know what I mean? And you're just really elated conducting their life, and so it's really to understand how the process works, the funeral service process itself, but then also how the planning process works as well, because there's pre-arrangement and there's pre-need. You know what I mean? And so pre-arrangement is me just kind of going in, sitting with the funeral director, kind of putting my wishes in line, but I don't start putting payment down. Okay. I just put my wishes in line, which is perfectly fine. And that in itself, I'm telling you, sitting on the other side of the table is such a blessing. You see what I'm saying? It's such a blessing for them to be able to just say, okay, I don't need to figure out if she wants cremation or burial. Because it's hard talk. Number one, if you didn't express it, you didn't say it, they got to figure it out, right? But then there's like held to family traditions, right? They're held to additionally their own inner feelings about it prior to, right? But then they're also held to the financial reality of it, right? How much is the local cemetery in your area? Do they have that in their bank account right now? You see? And then what on top of that could be. So in reference to the getting things in line, it kind of also maps out how financially you can try to meet that prior to, or at least lessen it if you can, right? But even if you don't put funds towards that policy, that pre-arrangement, that pre-arrangement, you would basically be having this pre-arrangement that at least expresses your wishes. Okay. Now, when you give the funeral home the money, is the funeral home taking the money and putting it in their bank account and just waiting? No, right? They are required to put it into a trust. They're required to have basically an escrow account that sits there, right? And you pay it all off, right? Or you can pay into it over time. And it generates maybe a little bit of interest that might help, in your payment towards the funeral services, right? The end of the day, they cannot put things like that are cash advance items with things that are outside of the funeral home's control, right? So the cemetery, they might not be able to put those in certain states into your whole prearrangement. So knowing that might be a separate prearrangement that you might need to have with the cemetery itself. So really understanding how your state works, your local community works, also understanding where the cremation process might happen, where the burial might take place. These type of things are things to get in order prior to, that takes off some of the thought process for your loved one. Now, sitting with that funeral home, you'll start to get together once you make these wishes, what they call a statement of goods and services, right? So the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, they actually require funeral homes to fall under these guidelines of how to really service you in that pre-arrangement contract, right? And the requirements that they're supposed to follow to make sure that the pre-arrangement contract is sound in place, and then it's also enforceable at the end of the day, right? So you're trying to look for that funeral home that can put this kind of statement of goods and services together that itemizes the things that you've requested, and then they put it into a locked pre-arrangement contract separate from the statement of goods and services, right? That is then something where that's our base, right? That's our basic, these are what you've asked of us. Now you need to either start paying into it, or at the time of passing, just know that that's what we're looking for. Okay. But understand, if you don't pay it all off prior to passing, then you're probably looking at an inflation change. Mm-hmm. So you've got to make sure that you're kind of following up on this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Especially with the cemeteries. A cemetery can go up $1,000 in 1 year, right? So knowing that, because you're talking about a piece of land for eternity, that's how they're pricing their number. You know what I mean? And the perpetual care of that. So, and knowing what private cemetery or public cemetery. If you live in a certain specific towns, you would probably be able to go into the public cemetery within that town for a lesser cost, because they're supposed to be chartered for that. But at the same time, it might be also a private cemetery that kind of control it by a board and a trust and things like that. But those are things to look into as well. So I think, once you've kind of gotten all that in order, you get this pre-arrangement contract in line, once you sign the dotted line, you basically have like a 10-day cool-off period. You know what I mean? To kind of figure out, okay, is that exactly what I wanted? Maybe I want to make a change real quick. Maybe there's something to change. Once you kind of lock that in stone, there's 2 ways a funeral home can put this contract together. It can be revocable or irrevocable. Meaning you can come back and make changes later, or you can't come back and make changes later. Irrevocable contracts usually are conjoined with contracts that are done because you're trying to receive services from your state, like maybe healthcare, kind of social service agencies, or additionally, like here would be like Mass Health or some kind of healthcare in general. So you're basically signing off that you're attesting that this asset has kind of gone to these specific services. And so, yeah, it becomes one of those things where, as we kind of lay out that portion of things, that trust develops itself. And once that trust is in play, you can kind of start paying into it. It's just knowing that you can't get the money back. And so, I'll be honest, the communities that I service, to say, hey, start putting into the money into the trust is a little harder. I think it's one of those things where if I can, to be able to do so. But I know if like the water heater goes, or I can't pay my bills or something like that, you can't go back to this escrow and take the money out. It only comes out with your death certificate, you see. So these kind of trusts are really pretty tight. You know what I mean? It's just the problem comes into play where, it's money that's kind of gone. You know what I mean? It's locked in, and you can't change. You can't say, oh, well, I wanted burial back then, and now I want direct cremation, and you want it cheaper, wanted to kind of get some of that money back, or whatever the case may be. There's no return on the irrevocable kind of pre-arrangement contract. So knowing that, you know what I mean? Knowing those details as you move into that space in trying to even put this kind of stuff in line. And then also understanding, like, how even probate and all that kind of works as well, and knowing the wills versus the trusts. I mean, how many of us have already gotten our wills together, or or thought about even a trust, and then
And Darnay, can I interject for a second?
please.
Don't you find that people oftentimes, and I've heard this too, and I'm wondering in your experience, they're afraid of getting or doing a will because of what do I don't have a lot of assets. I don't really have things. So I hear this a lot, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience, as well as if that's something you have heard.
Right. Yeah, I definitely hear that. And I think that when you don't have a lot, right, you'd be surprised really of how much you have if you stopped and thought about it for a second, right? If it's nothing else but that will holding your value systems, right? Or maybe you don't have anybody to turn anything over to, maybe even that perspective too. Sometimes putting things towards educational funds and things like that within your community. But I think when we're talking about starting a will, I think wills speak to, if I'm gone, what do I want people to remember or do with the things that I've either accomplished, attained, or acquired, right? And additionally, has my life, right, will it die in vain? You know what I mean? Where we can actually build something off of this will that you write down, right? So I always say, listen, you don't have to go for a will, you don't have to go to a lawyer. You can do a holographic will and at least getting that down, right? If you're not, having all this financial outlay, you know what I mean? If it's solely about, okay, I know the inevitability is real, right? But at the same time, the little things that I do have, the little keepsakes that you have, you know what I mean? It might be a family heirloom. It might be something that somebody turned over to you that you have a responsibility to maybe turn to others, or, you know what I mean? Or maybe you want it to be laid to rest with you. And so it could be even, I've had people actually write the remains of their loved one and where they go, at the time of. So it's kind of one of these, like, this tracking of, like, okay, you're not just a blip on the script. You know what I mean? You're not. You really have a lot to close out, even in reference to a homeless person. You know what I mean? There's a plenty there in reference to values that can come from the voices of them. You know what I mean? And how to live life, whether it be this way, that way, or the reality of people's society, whatever the case may be, there's plenty to put in reference to what a will could lay out. But at the same time, when we're talking about how that will help you in the long run, it will allow you to, yes, map out everything, but at the same time to be enacted. It has to go into probate court still. And guess what that means? Your assets and your liabilities are right there on the table, right? So the only way to avoid going into probate court is making sure you create like a trust. Okay. So say if you're a husband and wife scenario, or even if it's just you, right? If a husband and wife, it's like a third party, right? Because you're creating this whole other entity that is going to hold your assets. You get sued, they sue you. What you got? You ain't got nothing. What's the trust have? That's a different story, right? But it's its own entity. They're not suing the trust. They didn't do it. This trust didn't do it. You did, right? So these are the type of things that a trust can protect you from prior to your passing. But then in passing, it holds all your assets in its own entity so that it's not hit by all your liabilities. You see what I'm saying? And so how you map that out, and also how it helps you maybe even get healthcare. You know what I mean? Because you don't have all this asset sitting on you. Understanding that how life insurance policies also work too, and how the life insurance policies don't go into probate court. They're something that just, if you got a beneficiary written there, boom. Now, if there's no beneficiary, or the beneficiary's passed away or something like that, it's a little bit tricky. You know what I mean? It could sometimes go into probate court in that realm, but a lot of the times it's an easier transition when we're talking about the next of kin to the beneficiary or something like that. But yeah, I think getting a lot of stuff in order in advance kind of is one of those things where at some point we have to do it. If we can do it early on in life, like I was saying, when we're getting married, it would be probably best bet. You know what I mean? But at the same time, if it's something that does come upon us over time, or whether it be, retirement, or maybe it's now this terminal illness, it's something to face, just because it can give you so much more span of brain thoughts. And
Totally.
you know what I mean? Like it just
said that.
able.
Because actually, when I even talking to family members, I'm so shocked at how many people, and you just are always surprised because you would they plan everything to a T. Like you're talking about, you and I do not plan our meals, but other people, but like so it's very fascinating. But it comes down to the fact that it is about, they have it all, many of the things up in here, but you and I both know what's up here doesn't translate into, because this is legal, right? We're talking about legality involved. And so as much as we're all like, when mom passes and Johnny and Sue said, but mom said this, right? And they're literally sitting in that office. It's not, it's just not, it's hearsay. It becomes hearsay because
Hearsay.
Legal,
straight hearsay.
And Daria, I think that's the number one thing that I think, you and I probably want to highlight, the fact that these are legal affairs. They are legal matters, and that, and there are resources, by the way, like Daria was mentioning. ARP has like a program that they offer to actually have that component, free will. There's many out there, and I encourage those like baby boomers or seniors to get involved with their senior services. They have a separate department that helps you to find the right resources, and people who work in elder law. So elder law, which Daria, you can speak to a little bit if you want to, but like the fact of the matter is, so those of you who are seniors listening in or know a senior, just like we go to doctors, you have to have a specialization. I know many of you think, well, why do I need to go to a lawyer? Because they're going to really make you dig deep into the things you have, and you process. I'll give you a personal example. When I was teaching, Virginia retirement system is a separate system that is paid into. But when we moved to South Carolina, I work for Medical University of South Carolina. I still have a retirement amount that is sitting there that I still have to take care of. I'm giving all of us examples that we have multiple careers, many of us, multiple facets, and there is money that is sitting that my husband's not going to know, my family members will not know until I stick it into, like Daria's mentioning, this nice package cocoon, whatever that looks like. But it needs to be a cocoon that is protected, that just like we protect our babies, is what I really feel like we need to do. And Daria, I do understand that finances come into place, but we do spend a lot of money in other places. And I think if we could just decide, like, we do invest into our home, we do invest into our food, and the third thing we need to start doing is investing into the after.
Right. And because you think about it, if the generation before you had thought about it, right, would you, like, say you had the ability to have a $10,000 put away, right? Every time there was a passing in your family, boom, right? The next one comes. Maybe you didn't make all that. Now it's gotten you even lower, and now it's even taken from, boom, right? If nothing's in play, boom, right? Every time a person in your family passes away that you might be responsible in the financial realm to handle the services for, you kind of smack off the table things, and especially when it's left to children. You know what I mean? It's hard for children to kind of honestly take some of the things that are coming down on them. Like, you could have a nice, beautiful house, pool in the background, and, nice property and a nice community. And at the end of the day, that property, if you haven't put things in place appropriately, is going to now be the responsibility of your children. And can they do it? Can they actually financially keep it going? So if your thought was like this was going to be the family ponderosa forever, right? How could that happen if they don't have the ability to do so? And to put the weight on for them to figure it out. If, like, I've always noticed that my dad, I have to actually give him credit for this, because he has been putting into this house, and it's a large house for like the two of them. And so I see him fixing the heating system and he's doing all these things and pouring into the house, which is great. You know what I mean? And it's also makes it a safe place for them to be, as well as they, age and things like that. But at the end of the day, I realize how much of a benefit that is for me. You know what I mean? And then I see my mom at now in this stage of her life, cleaning out every closet. I don't clean. I don't need this. I don't need those. And I'm like, you know what I mean? What are you doing? You know what I mean? And so these things where I see them preparing, and I think to myself, well, I guess that's, what we do. You know what I mean? So it is a good example for that next generation, but then also how it helps them not get so off footing, because the mental, emotional, and sometimes the physical aspect of the grieving process is enough. Add the financial aspects in there. You know what I mean? And you already know that the relational, the family stuff is already going to be buzzing, and the dynamics are going to be buzzing. So
it's true. So there is going to be administration everyone has to deal with post whatever it looks like.
Yeah,
the admin stuff. But it could be a lot easier, so that you can get to the part where you get to work with your feelings and your emotions. And
yes, so that's why. Yeah, what I started doing was a workshop, and actually I'm gonna start up another series again come January. But it's stepping stones. And actually, we have this like whole workbook that I created, and I think it's like 50 something pages. But it's a workbook that you go through line by line and basically fill out this. Take this whole concept of and embracing.
Why don't you do this?
Leaving. I know, I'm so sick. I did it years ago, but I've been just like working on it in reference to bringing it together. And then right before the pandemic is when I finally got it all together. I had a whole like group of women within actually 3 different churches here in Boston area, and we were getting ready to start the series. We started because it's a 3 workshop series. And so the first workshop we go through like part 1, right? And so we started that, and then the pandemic hit, and we have not been able to get back. And because they're not really as tech savvy. So at the same time, I was just actually talking to one of the directors to try to hopefully get us back into play to finish it out. But at least they've got their workbook, and they can continue to do it, even if they didn't weren't able to finish with me specifically, because it's pretty much self-guided. We even go through your family tree, and the dynamics of a family tree. You don't understand. Family trees.
Oh, girls, no joke.
Oh, you know what I mean? Well, because the blended family, you know what I mean? And all that.
People talk about somebody joined that came out of the woodworks when Uncle Sam died, and you're like, oh yes, people come out of the woodworks. So you didn't know about them, did you know?
That ancestry will get you every time.
Yeah.
I know. You do have to be kind of like mindful, but you got to also remember we were living in times where being more secretive. And speaking about certain things was taboo-ish. You know what I mean? So you got to recognize the time frame, the mindset at the same time. Nowadays, we're definitely more open. You know what I mean? I'd like transparency and truth to be a little bit more to the forefront, but I think it's definitely a different way of approach nowadays than back in the day. But yeah, like family trees, all that stuff. I mean, so I will definitely keep you guys attuned to that. So that you guys can jump into a workshop at any time, and we can kind of get that going and do it on a virtual level. I love it.
Yes, I was about to say Zoom. That's great.
Sounds good.
No, I saw that workbook. That's great.
Yeah.
And then I think highlighting the fact that it is so emotional, this whole process, right, of loss and death. But then if you pre-plan, I'm telling you all from personal experience, it really does make it a lot, I don't want to use the word easier.
No, I think it.
I don't know what the right
It's really nothing. It really just takes the logistical stuff out of play. Like you have to use your frontal lobe.
Yes.
Emotionally going nuts. You know what I mean? And want to curl up in a ball, right? It's cutting that out. And that's what I feel like getting those things in line prior to does.
And Daria, you probably see it all the time, right? Where you notice that when the person left behind is making decisions, it just, if you really have, and everybody has a different relationship with that, but let's just talk about, let's say if it was one that was pretty strong, when they want to do right by the person who's passed, right? You want it to just, and I don't want to use the word perfect, but you want it to be perfect for them. It's that last tribute you get to give to this living body, right? And then whatever you believe in at that point is whatever the idea is. It's that final goodbye to that physical self.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to honor all these wishes, and at times even when it is spelled out, it's so great when it's spelled out for that. Or even between having a discussion, sometimes like you and I were talking about this one day about the clothing helps, right? Like having that, right? But even that component of just talking about some of those things, and then literally the writing down of that package.
Boom.
I know some people were giving out Storyworth, that book you write about your legacy and everybody was giving out for Christmas. Well, Daria, you need to come up with some package for like pre-plan, like.
Oh, tell me about it, honestly, because the thing about it is the reality of getting it all together is really one of these things where it's going to, like we said, eliminate that, give you more brain space, especially when the time arises, or if you're in that time, you know what I mean? You're now able to really, honestly, turn it in your mind. What we try to do within the stepping stones is make you see that embracing this is really kind of looking at you and how you live beyond. You know what I mean? And so it's really figuring out these things in advance will definitely help your loved ones, but additionally, how much, clutter are you having at that end of life experience? And I think it is one that I feel like I say it, right? But when the day comes, you know what I mean? Like I see you and the loss of your mother, you know what I mean? And how you still pick up and move forward, right? And you're even in this space right now, willing to open it up. But you've also seen how the wisdom in the wounds has come forward as well. And to be able to move forward and share it with others is only the gems that help even myself. You know what I mean? When I service a family that's lost their loved one, I've never experienced that. I am recognizing, oh, there is a tomorrow. There is a tomorrow, and it's just how will I walk into tomorrow? And additionally, I think even when you have the day of diagnosis, you have to think of these things as well. Is the day of diagnosis feels like D-Day, but the thing about it is you've been dealing with whatever it is prior to. It's now keeping going and keeping mentally in the right space. And I think that there's some fear in trying to embrace some of this, and it's understandable.
Understandable. Well, Daria, I feel like we could have a part 3, part 4, but at least the conversation starts with this.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe and running through some of these things, I think are great. So I appreciate the conversation and me being able to steal the floor a little bit today in my realm.
Totally. So just to summarize, we're just highlighting that it is the idea of pre-planning is just a gift. It is a gift that we give ourselves and our families. And that what Daria mentioned earlier, legacy. We all have legacy. It's not about the material things. It's just the idea of, at the end of the day, it's not about the amount of things, but whatever we possess, we just want it to be done the right, like the way that person would wish. And the way to do it is some of the highlights that we had. So at least we're hoping to kind of get your brain going around this topic.
For sure. Just the beginning of the conversation. So reach out to us. Yeah, and reach out to us, with any questions or directions, resources that you might need.
Yes, Daria is a wealth of information on this subject.
Thank you.
And it's a passion of hers. And of course, you can reach out to us at any point. All right, everyone, have a lovely week or whenever you tune in ahead. And thank you for letting us be with you today.
Yes, thank you. God bless y'all.